Sorry, I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, as the member for Goldstein, and it's an excellent way that we started this debate, it is wonderful to speak on this piece of legislation because, as you know, Deputy Speaker, superannuation is Australians' money. It's Australians' money. It's not the money of the Labor Party. It's not the money of industry super funds. It's not the money of the corrupt cartel kickbacks for the CFMEU. It's not there to be laundered for institutions as they see fit. It is there for Australians as they see fit. That's why we fundamentally believe that Australians should be able to use their super for simple things in the ordinary sequence of life. Until 1992, you would have been told you were absolutely mad, absolutely stark, raving bonkers to think that it was more logical to save for your 67th birthday income than it was to go on and save a deposit to buy your own home, because you get the benefits of buying your own home during your working life and your retirement as the foundations of economic security and one of the 3 pillars of retirement security. But that's not good enough for the Labor Party. They wanted to engage in a form of economic social engineering and reverse it because it helps the corrupt interests of the modern Labor movement, where you actually prioritise superannuation funds so that fund managers can take bigger bonuses, bigger graft, bigger components of people's superannuation money and deny Australians their capacity to buy their first home. And worse than that, Deputy Speaker, not only are they trying to deny Australians the pathway to be able to save and buy their first home, even worse than that, they then want to use Australian superannuation money to then go on and buy homes that super funds own, so then they can rent them back to young Australians so they can be serfs to superannuation funds. It is neo-feudalism on a scale that we have never seen before, under the hysterical ideal that it is somehow advancing the interests of Australia. So is the Labor Party the party of serfdom to super funds? You betcha, Deputy Speaker, they are. And they can boast about it as much as they want in the parliament, because some of us see the con, some of us see the trick, some of us see the deception, and some of us will never back down from calling out how much they are seeking to corrode and to eat into the foundations of the ambition and the dreams of next generation of Australians to simply feed the interests of their friends. Superannuation is a choice. Of course, superannuation, just to remind you, Deputy Speaker, did exist before 1992. They don't like to remind you of that. Before 1992, superannuation existed. And before 1992, Deputy Speaker, do you know superannuation policies actually had in them, firstly, that you could cash them in to use it as a deposit to buy your first home, because people fundamentally understood that buying your own home was more important for your retirement security as well as your working life than having a larger balance when you turn 65 at that time and now 67. Logic. But in fact, they often deferred obligations to contribute because people understood that between the ages of about 18 and 35, what was the biggest financial priority young Australians had? Well, they voted with their feet, Deputy Speaker. People understood the most important thing you could do for your long-term and your working life and your retirement financial security was own your own home. But, of course, when young Australians own their own home, guess what happens? They're proud. They're independent. They're more likely to go on and form families and be the foundation of the success of this country. Go on and then start small businesses, lean into the future with confidence, own a share of this nation, want to defend it and conserve its great traditions and its values. And that's the one thing that directly assaults the progressive madness of the modern Labor Party. So they must attack it at its foundations at every step. And at the moment you see the insanity of the modern Labor project by their approach to housing and to superannuation. The modern insanity where Labor likes to take an increasingly large chunk of young Australians' wages and chuck it off into a fund that they control or their mates control for their 67th birthday, And their answer then to why young Australians can't afford to buy their own home, because they've deliberately, maliciously taken their wages and thrown it out into the future in a hole which only they can access and control, is then to say, well, the government should come along and own your home. Will be the solution, and the government should come and invest in it. So they're building out their stake and control over home ownership while also increasing their control, because that's what the modern Labor project is. The modern Labor project is how do they control Australians. It doesn't matter what it is, from birth to death. They want to control you. They want to control education so they can indoctrinate the next generation of Australians to think that the state is their parents. They want to control the first job and the first opportunity young Australians get so they can control their career pathways, and then go on and dictate to them how they save, how they use their wealth, and how they're in a position to be able one day to go and secure their retirement. They want to take control of your wealth so they can then go on and decide and determine whether or not you own your own home, and their preference is, if you are not in state-sponsored housing, that you are renting from their friends in super funds, so that you are serfs to a super fund. And then, of course, their preference is that they also control your working life by making sure that you are part of the organised labour system, and if you choose not to be part of that system and take the diktat from organised unions and organised working organisations, that you're shunned and isolated and you're not on the taxpayer's teat, or you're not able to get the corrupt kickbacks and cartels that is part of the modern system that we see every day through the press reports of the CFMEU. And then, of course, when you get to retirement, all their answers is how do we impose more cost, more obligations and more responsibility at the time of your life when you can no longer earn an income, because their only pathway is to harvest anything that you have saved and sacrificed to get ahead. Thanks. That is the Labor project. The Labor project is how do they control Australians. But don't worry, Deputy Speaker, to the children in the gallery who want hope and opportunity, there is a better way. There is a better way where young Australians can control their money, can control their ambition, can control their destiny. It is the Liberal way, because we believe that young Australians can own their own home, can control their income, can control their super, can control their destiny. We believe in backing Australians and any Australian who wants to back themselves. That is the lived ambition of the Liberal dream. A nation of 26 million people standing on their own 2 feet, appealing to their best hopes, standing on their own 2 feet and aspiring to something better, not just for themselves but their families and their communities. And when we talk about a bill like this, what we're talking about is whether Australians own their own money or not, whether they control their own money or not, and whether they can then go on and use their own money or not. But of course, the Labor Party is not interested in achieving that. Their motivation and their objective is how do they get as much money into the funds they control and their mates control. Because when they get that money in those funds, they can then use it for the cartel kickbacks to the unions that can then be kicked back into the campaign coffers of the Labor Party, so they can sit in this chamber, so they can then go on and vote for more money. It is the circle of cartel kickback life. It's almost like the opening of the movie The Lion King, Deputy Speaker, where it's so perverse it's beautiful, because literally the mafia could not design a system with such legality and seemingly such lawful sanction as that circle of life. Labor Party MPs get elected, vote for more income to go into industry super funds. Industry super funds give, through marketing expenses, more cartel kickbacks to unions. Unions donate to the Labor Party to campaign, to get elected into chamber and keep repeating the circle, the cartel kickback circle of life. That is the Labor movement. Whereas we look at it and say, how do young Australians own their own money, own their own destiny, control their own future? That's what we believe in. And so when we want young Australians to have their super fund, we want to own their own destiny. And so when you look at this bill and say it's your money, you should control it and it should be paid with your wages, we look at it as seeing empowerment for you. But we want to make sure that it doesn't impoverish small businesses on the road towards that future. And one of the things the Labor Party doesn't care about is small business. With the greatest respect, they've managed to come up with a minister responsible for small business, but we know she has no say in the cabinet table. Like many ministers who might have something worthwhile to say, because they're not part of the right faction, they're not part of the right union, they're not part of the right state, whatever it is, they're silenced on the issues that matter to the future direction of this country. And we know that through this legislation. The government's own advice from the Treasury was that this bill needed 18 months to be implemented so that small businesses didn't go broke, because there is no super on jobs that don't exist, because the small business collapses. We already have record insolvencies for small business in this country. We already have the lowest private sector jobs growth in the history of this country. We already have nationwide 8 out of 10 jobs being created only because of taxpayer revenue. This government is fuelling inflation in the process. They're using debt to finance expenditure today to prop up job numbers, which is fuelling inflation, which means Australians are paying higher interest rates because of this government's reckless fiscal policy to pretend their economic program is working when in fact is failing and fuelling inflation today. Every Australian Deputy Speaker is paying the consequences of this reckless Labor government and their reckless spending program, and they're paying it through higher interest rates today. But one of the worst things we could have is see small businesses collapse because the government simply won't implement this reform with enough lead time to help small businesses adjust. Because so many, Deputy Speaker, I know you understand small business because you've been in it yourself. When you've got revenue coming in, and sometimes people aren't always paying you as fast as they want, whether it's the Commonwealth, whether it's a state government, whether it's a big business, or whether it's another small business waiting to be paid themselves, that you often have to go and then finance the cost of these things from your own account. And so often, small business people who are aspiring to get ahead and to back others have had to find ways to make sure that their staff are paid on time, and they always pay them before they pay themselves, Deputy Speaker. Always. And that is always something that's lost on this government, and they don't care. And the same goes with their super. So enabling small business the breathing space to be able to find their pathway to conform with the law, and the answer from the Labor Party has been, stuff them. That doesn't matter. And we know from the statistics that some of the biggest payroll companies in the world that so many small businesses depend upon, like MYOB, have produced reports publicly that have stated that 22.6% of businesses are at risk of insolvency. And not just at risk of insolvency in terms of going off to ASIC and saying we can't do this anymore, but not only does that potentially deny, of course, the people who run those businesses and their future and economic success, and of course their capacity to be able to afford their own superannuation. But of course what goes with that, if those companies go down and those small businesses go down, is one, the existing employees, and of course their superannuation as well as their wages. But sitting behind so many small businesses is the start gate, the opportunity for so many young Australians who take the first step into the ladder of economic opportunity. It's often the first gateway for where they get their job to become full participants in the Australian economic opportunity that we want, where they get the skills, the training, the knowledge, the acculturation into a business environment where they find their hunger, their thirst, their ambition and their dreams. And when that's suffocated because Labor simply doesn't care, because their objective is prioritised by how do they get as much money as possible into super funds so that their mates can pay off cartel kickbacks and pay their fund managers bigger bonuses at the expense of small businesses. They are trading off that ambition, that dream and that of that young Australian to feed themselves. It's not just immoral and this is wrong. And that's why this amendment is so important, because it goes to the heart not just of economic transition to help small business survive, it goes to the heart of the type of economy we want, built from the foundations of enterprise, initiative and hard work, rather than the socialist model of top-down corporatism and statism. So, yep, we're moving this amendment because we believe in it clearly. We believe in it proudly. We believe strongly that we're going to back small business every step of the way and fight for small business every step of the way, and we will be unrelenting in standing up for small business every step of the way. And if the government had any rational thought, they'd be backing it every step of the way.